So hopefully we'll be able to reconstruct it this time. Yes, yes. I need to do another version of this talk because I'm giving a paper at the Shanghai Science and Technology Conference in a couple of weeks. So I'll have to make it less philosophical and more a bit more sciencey, which I should be able to do. Over the last 10 years or so, there've been a number of people in bioethics arguing about a right to mental integrity. And it's something that has arisen out of debates about neuroethics and concerns, I guess, about the scope of neurotechnological interventions. The thing I want to talk about, I'm really pleased that the people who are here because the people here can have a view about this, is I think an obstacle to talking seriously about a right to mental integrity are the very familiar difficulties we have around distinguishing what counts as bodily and what counts as mental. So that's what I have in mind by the extended mind. So if you kind of think about, if you take the extended mind hypothesis seriously, then I think it deflates the idea of there being a distinctive right to mental integrity and one that's needed. So a few people have been talking about this. Tom Douglas and Lisa Forsberg wrote a paper a few years ago. This is discussion of Rie conjoint twins. And it's just to make the point that in law and in ethics, the right to bodily integrity is fundamental and really important. So Rie conjoint twins was a case where they were going to separate Mary and Jody, and they knew that if they did that, Mary would die on the operating table. So the questions of the kind of right, or the importance of bodily integrity is to the forefront there. And also, if you think about consent and where consent comes from, we often, we'll say with sort of shorthand that consent is to do with respect for autonomy, which of course it is. But it's also partly been driven by this importance of being able to say what happens to your body and to block interference or impingements upon the body. So the idea of a right to mental integrity is motivated in a similar kind of sense. Is that there's something fundamental about the integrity of mind and the importance to say no to certain kinds of non-consensual interference with the mind. So Douglas and Forsberg say it's a right that I understand is a right against certain kinds of non-consensual interference with the mind. So with both rights, the right to bodily integrity, the right to mental integrity, consent is a key concept when it comes to whether or not that right is still binding. If you consent to an impingement upon the body, then that's done with permission. You might say the same about a right to mental interference. In the case that it's consented to, then it doesn't have that, wouldn't violate that right. So here's some examples from this paper. Yeah, so it is about 10 years that this debate's been going. There's one of the older papers on it by Bubitz and Reinhard Merkel. And here are 3 examples which they think are examples of neurotechnology impinging upon the mind. So first, eliciting emotions. So there's a food chemist working for McDonald's or someone else like that, who are finding that they have decreasing sales, and but they also serve this complimentary welcome drink. So the thought is that we'll dose that with, I actually don't know whether this is a real drug or not, with a drug called ghrelin, which isn't hazardous to bodily and mental health, but it increases appetite, and hence the restaurant's turnover as customers order more. So it's a kind of way to get people to consume more. What Bubitz and Reinhard Merkel suggest is this is an example where the mental integrity of people who are kind of consuming this and eating more McDonald's or whatever it is has been violated because that has happened non-consensually. So the motivating thought is here. You can sort of see that if this happens without your knowledge, does look like something that's happening non-consensually and somehow is manipulating you or getting you to do things that you otherwise would not. So it seems on the face of problematic. The claim I want to put pressure on is that this counts as an impingement on somebody's mental integrity. Second example, so there's a private detective investigating corrupt practices in the firm. So a psychiatrist, so how you do this without consent, I'm not sure, but stimulates someone via TMS and alters the brain works necessary for deceit, which makes lying increasingly harder and therefore easier to detect. So thought here is that this one's perhaps more clearly an impingement upon the brain, with the intention that it makes it more difficult. Sorry, Mark, was it?
No, I thought we weren't recording for that.
Yep.
That's wrong.
Non-consented neuroenhancement. So there's a financial broker into speed trading, makes profits from short span volatility and stock prices, and he wants all his employees. Actually, you should do this, Mike. He wants his employees to be constantly
already done it, John. You didn't even know.
Well, gee, it's not working today. Spike drinks with a psycho stimulant, which increasing vigilance, awareness, and motivation. So again, if your employee did that, we would be thinking somehow, and did that non-consensually, and somehow you've been manipulated and rolled in some significant kind of way. This is a background text. This is going back to my doctoral stuff. I think one of the challenges for the debate about the right to mental integrity is that it presupposes that we can say something sensible that we can agree on about the distinction between the mind and the body. Because if we can't do that, then bodily rights are going to collapse into mental rights. So this is the place I want to push. Some of you will know Brentano, Franz Brentano. He's interesting because he was writing before the analytic continental divide. So someone that both analytic philosophers and continental philosophers refer back to, and quite significant in the philosophy of psychology. What he's pushing for is not just a feature of the continental tradition. If you think about people like Locke and Hume and Gilbert Ryle, they also were attempting to ground the mental or mentality in the physical world or in the body. Ryle, of course, is perhaps the most famous with the Ghost of the Machine, where he's trying to reduce the mind to behavioural predispositions. A person I wanted to talk about more is Brentano. So this passage, those of you who have kind of dipped a toe into philosophy of mind and discussions of intentionality, probably have come across Brentano's thesis. And so Brentano's thesis is stated here, and the thought is that every mental phenomena is characterized by what scholastics in the Middle Ages called the intentional or mental existence of an object. And so what people thought was, okay, so intentionality is the mark of the mental. When you have intentionality, which is the directness of awareness to an intentional object, that's a mental phenomenon or a mental event. In the absence of that, it's a physical event. Things become curly if you read this book a little bit further on, because in the history of the philosophy of mind, you'll find people like Armstrong, all these kind of really, very analytic philosophers of mind referring to this, saying, like, intentionality picks out mental stuff, the other stuff's physical. But if you delve into what he says here, it's actually a much more difficult distinction. So one of the things about intentionality in the discussion of philosophy of mind is that is referential opacity and the potential non-existence of an object. So kind of thing about mental events and being aware of things consciously is it's possible that what's possible is to think about things that don't in fact exist. So we can think about we can think about Santa Claus or the abominable snowman or other entities like that, and we can kind of have a discussion about them, but potentially they don't exist. So kind of feature mentality and intentionality is the non-existence of an object. But that's not, in fact, what he's saying here. He uses the term inexistence of an object. And the thought is not so much that the object might not exist, it's that within an intentional mental event, there's an intentional object within that mental event. So the intentional object exists in the mental event. And he goes on, massively confusingly, to talk about physical mental events as well. Not at all. So it's not the distinction that we think it is. There's some mental events which are physical because they don't have the inexistence of an object in that mental event. So just to say that this is all a bit tricky for other reasons, over and above what the boundary of the mind is. So I was looking at this picture at all, and I noticed that Simone de Beauvoir has both eyes closed. So Sartre's carefully going, yes, just that direction. Yes, just in case. So these two, along with Merleau-Ponty, and others within the phenomenological tradition, or the existentialists, came up with conceptions of mind which make it difficult to disentangle mental events from physical events. So Merleau-Ponty is really good, but he's really, takes some work. So when he thinks about subjectivity, or so what we are, what a person is, we inevitably find it bound up with that of the body and that of the world. This is because my existence as subjectivity equals consciousness is merely one with my existence as a body and with the existence of the world. And because the subject that I am, when taken concretely, is inseparable from this body and this world. So Merleau-Ponty says that we think about consciousness and our mental events, it is almost always something to do with a state of our body and our body's existence in the world. So I've got slight tingling in these fingers, so that's kind of part of my consciousness and mentality at the moment. The rest of my present awareness is to do with the room and people are here. So my awareness is directed out into the world. And once you factor in these things, it's not clear what's left over for someone like Merleau-Ponty. So the mind is extended into the world and into the body. There are a contemporary philosophers of mind who have picked this up. Here's an example, Mark Rowlands, who puts a similar point in a different way. So mental events, states, processes, are not just things in our brains, they're also things that happen partly in our bodies and even partly in the world outside. So he's saying partly, he's not fully committing to it. The qualification partly is one, obvious, two, crucial, and ignored with surprising frequency. The idea rather is that in the process of some mental processes, but not all, part of that mental process, but never all, is made up of factors that occur outside the brain of the subject. So he's not saying it's all out there in the world, but you can't really sensibly talk about mental events without talking about the world, which is going to be a problem for that distinction. He talks about Cartesian materialism, which Daniel Dennett, who passed away recently, talked about some things too. And for Rowlands and also for Dennett, the Cartesian conception of mind has this first feature that we will all be aware of, which is that the mind is a non-physical thing. It's not the brain, and it's not the body. It's somehow out there. That's part of the Cartesian picture. But it's the second bit which is coming under pressure with the existentialists and with Rowlands. There's the idea that the mind is something that exists inside the head. So they're denying that claim. And in the absence of the truth of that claim, there's a question mark about how substantive a right to mental integrity would be, or a right to mental non-interference. So Dennett talks about this idea of the Cartesian theatre as when more fully exploring the second feature that Rowlands is talking about, where it's the idea that it's somehow like a finish line or boundary somewhere in the brain, which is the place where everything comes together and we see experience, where experience is presented. So he talks about this idea, this myth of the Cartesian theatre, a place where there's someone observing what's going on. And then it points out, well, that if you do that, then there's a further question about what's the entity that's sitting there with the experience coming in. He just denies that there is any such entity. So again, another problem for distinguishing bodily integrity from mental integrity. And the literature on this, of people arguing about the right to mental integrity, I think tends to play pretty fast and loose with what's a tricky distinction. So here's someone called Craig talking about direct pain intervention, right to mental integrity. So he says, oh no, it's not dualism by talking about the focus, shifting the focus from body to mind. Rather, it acknowledges that the mind is generated and sustained by the brain as one component of the body. So what's that saying? It's saying that the brain is somehow in the body and the mind is generated, sustained somehow by the bit of the body which is the brain. But if, as I think is plausible to think, the existentialists and Rowlands and others and Ryle and others are onto something about how much of our mental lives is in fact tied up with awareness with our body and states of our body. I think this is just nonsense. I think it's invoking a little homunculi. So Bubitz and Merkel, this is the paper I mentioned before. Yes, so they say neurotechnologies promise to enable us to surmount the natural boundaries of the mind, which are the skull, and to modulate the inward workings of the mind. The situation for the law has profoundly changed. It must set up normative boundaries. So these guys as well somehow think the boundary of the mind is the stuff inside the skull somehow, when there are plausible reasons for thinking if you want to understand the mind, particularly the extended mind, it's at least significantly also about body. So some more examples from Tom and Lisa's paper to sort of try and test out what this might mean. So there's a barista here who's kind of well-meaning but paternalistic, slips an antidepressant into someone's coffee with the result that someone's mood is somewhat lifted for a few hours. They might also do that with a anti-asthmatic medication into someone's morning coffee. They see that someone's a bit wheezy. And they say that while both the antidepressant and the anti-asthmatic interference is upon your body, it's only the antidepressant that interferes with your mind. Thus, antidepressant infringes an additional duty, which is, and so is more seriously wrong. So I thought it was in both cases, you've got, you're dosing the person that just had coffee. It's only in the first case that you've also violated someone's mental integrity because it's lifted their mood, as opposed to now I don't agree with the distinction, because I think if you, well, it's probably some of us are asthmatics. If you're asthmatic and you're a little wheezy, medication which takes that away so that you are now breathing more freely means that your mental life has changed as well. So your experience of the world has changed quite profoundly because you're moving and interacting with the world more freely and not aware of the labouring of your breathing. So I don't see the distinction with this case. I think they're equivalent. And moreover, if we were to cash out how you might feel differently. In the first case, that might be that you find yourself able to do a bit more, moving a bit quickly. So many of the ways in which if an antidepressant does help you will be bodily realized. So I don't buy the distinction. I don't have an intuition that there's something else going on here. So I think we can do the work that we need to about both cases just with a right to bodily integrity. And if the first one's worse than the other, it might be, something to do with the pervasiveness of the ways in which an antidepressant impacts you as opposed to asthma medication. Here's another example. So Jing Bao's done a marathon recently. So someone sneaks into Jing Bao's room and gives him some TMS to help him with his leg that's hurting a bit. And their intuition here is that because with TMS there's no direct touching of the body, it's just over the surface of the skull. There's no violation to bodily integrity because it's not touching, yet it has impinged upon someone's integrity in some sense. So this is an example of a person's mental integrity being violated. So I'm not convinced about this one either, because I think the effects of it are pretty well picked up by a right to bodily integrity. Because the effects of the TMS are going to be experienced in a bodily kind of way. And I also wonder whether no touching is not a necessary condition for bodily integrity being violated. So we could think about, someone might give you a coffee with something in it, which violates your bodily integrity, yet they haven't touched you in any way. So I don't see that that's a condition for something being mental as opposed to bodily anyway. So I've got to remember why I've got the slide here now. This is from the Supreme Court. Yes, this is an example where the Supreme Court has said that the right to bodily integrity can be overridden even though it's indirect. So it's saying that something secondary can impinge upon the right to bodily integrity too. Yeah, so they have this qualifier in here in their paper. Immense difficulties in specifying the scope of the right, in part because of the difficulties in defining the boundaries of the mind. Yeah, I agree. And in part because it's unclear exactly what kinds of non-consensual interference with the mind would infringe the right to mental integrity. I agree. So we probably didn't need to write a lot of extra papers about it. I think if we're going to talk about an additional right that has the sort of power that the right to bodily integrity does, we need to be able to adequately or reasonably adequately specify the scope of the right. Otherwise, it's this thing with a lot of force, which is undirected. Also wonder whether there might be some other sort of concept that might pick up what's at stake here. I mean, if we're kind of worried about by just focusing upon bodily integrity, we end up just talking about stuff that's really just body and embodied mind, body stuff. We could we've already got other concepts that we might use to pick these things up. These are some other things that I worked on, which has kind of led my thinking about this. This is from a paper which I published a few years ago, where I'm sort of trying to get some purchase on what might impact upon the integrity of an agent, or be kind of an affront to something like mental integrity. And Adrian Walsh pointed this little passage at the start of the Republic out to me, where that there's a dialogue and they're sort of going, oh, gee, doesn't it suck to get old? Isn't it just like really rubbish to get old? And talk about Sophocles and say there's some things about getting old which are which compensate. So hey, there's no doubt at an old age you get a great deal of peace and freedom for things like sex. Okay. Might not want to take that too far, but when the desires lose their intensity and ease up, then what happens is absolutely as Sophocles described, freedom will great many demented masters. You know, it may or may not be true that anger and other strong passions perhaps do become easy to deal with as you age. And so the thought that I had about this example, about castration when it's offered to sex offenders, might be that in a situation where it's kind of good reason to suppose that someone might transform themselves in a way that the way they become is integrated with the sense of the kind of person that they want to be, then should we be worried about interventions, be that neurointerventions or in this case castration, which lead people to change more quickly? So it's kind of interested in this question of how much does it matter about the causation, things that lead to changes in integrity and to agency. And my suggestion is, well, if someone can kind of has a way that they want to be and they can stitch it together and make sense of themselves as an agent once that change has happened, I don't think there's another worry to have if people can do that. And this is yeah. So I talked about 3 instances of potentially radical changes to agency. Castration's one, conversion therapy is another, and pharmacologically induced changes to agency. Now, what I've sort of tried to do in the past is tell a story about 1 and 3, and to say, look, 2 is one of the ones about 2 is that it doesn't usually involve someone stitching, reconstituting their agency after therapy of that kind. I'll just sort of mention this example. This is a really old book now. It's from a large number of years, many years ago. And it's one of the first books that came out about Prozac when it came out, which is when I started to think about this. And Peter Kramer is a psychiatrist who was helping a woman called Tess, who found after she'd taken Prozac that she became a very different kind of person and someone that she liked. So she'd been in one mental state or had one form of agency for 20 or 30 years, then briefly felt different medication. When she started to go off Prozac, she didn't like it because she could feel the previous version of herself starting to re-emerge. So when she said, I'm not myself when I start to come off this medication, for Kramer raised this question, well, who should she be in the prior 20 or 30 years? My sensible answer to that question is she was still herself, still the same person. It's really about the kind of person or the kind of agent that one wants to be or aspires to be, and whether or not that's now possible. He had another patient too called Philip who felt better, but didn't like it. So he felt that wasn't the kind of person that he really wanted to be. He's been prematurely robbed of his disdain, his hatred, and his alienation. So what I think might be, we want to kind of flesh out an account of mental integrity. I think we need to look more broadly into what it is that stitches agency together. It's kind of another very, very old book. Some people are worried about the artificial creation or construction of experiences or things that might impinge upon agency or change agency. Robert Nozick's famous example from a long time ago, and he said before the Matrix, that if there was a machine along those lines where you could kind of pre-program your life's experiences, you wouldn't plug into it. And people have different intuitions about that. And but the thing I was interested in was, well, how much does it really matter what the causation is? This actually, Pickers and I were talking about Wayne Sumner the other day. This is from his book Welfare, Happiness and Ethics, where he's trying to unpack the relevance of veridicality. And that's what the Nozick experience seems to be primarily about. So here's this example of Asta, who's someone who has a letter telling her that his son has died in the war, reassuring that he died quickly without pain. And she kind of got some comfort from that reassurance, but didn't really believe it. So when she was later visited by the sergeant who found her son, carried him back to the lines in those true circumstances, she said, I would have given 10 years of my life to have been able not to ask, but bargains like that can't be made. Either you're the sort of person who can hide from things, or else you're not. I'd rather be so unhappy I'm not to die, it's the facts in the face, than delude myself. So she asked the sergeant to tell her the truth. So she's someone like many of us who veridicality, connecting with the world in a truthful kind of way, is fundamental to how she lives her life. And maybe that's the intuition that Nozick's plugging into. What might that say about these examples where a neurointervention or a medication or a surgical intervention radically changes the way that we respond to the world? Well, I think Aristotle is basically correct about this, is that so Aristotle has this doctrine of the mean in respect of the passions, where for things like anger and other emotions, in order for it to count as a virtuous expression of that feeling, has to be directed to the right things, with the right people in the right way, in the right time for the right length of time. So he says that in the case of anger, mildness is the mean in respect of that passion. My suggestion is that for radical self-transformation, for which I don't think we really need a right to mental integrity, if it's the case that someone can change or alter, or actually live in accordance with the mean, which is what they would like for those reactions, then I don't think we should be overly concerned about it violating them as an agent. And this is revisable as well. We might decide that on medication or some other way, or some other sort of intervention, we become a milder person than we previously were, and come to see that that's the way in which we want to live. So it's kind of interesting, like just sort of doing these slides off the top of my head. And I had sort of stuck to you a little bit. I found it. Yes, different sort of experience. So what I'm interested in here really is integrity of self-conception. And I'm not convinced that a right to mental integrity is really going to help us out here. And my suggestion is that when the way in which you're responding to the world fits within normal constraints for you, and these are revisable, your self-conception is important to determine whether or not these things are correct. So our means in respect to the passions are amenable to revision in light of changes in self-conception. What I was up to with the castration stuff is it implies more than just talking to people and getting their consent and them understanding. It's partly about thinking about the probability or the chances that someone will revise their self-conception in that particular way. Okay, that's it. It's the end of the slides.
I think Neil's online and he knows what to do if he wants to ask a question. So I will look in the room. I'm just going to take a little minute here to write down some names. All right, Grant, go ahead.
I think excellent paper, John, and I only want to support your main thesis, really, and offer you the possibility of pulling in a substantial treatment of holistic neurodynamic rhythms combining bodily reaction and psychocognitive, if we can coin a word, supervenient properties on the basis of them, because that view exactly is what Walter and I made the basis of the soul or psyche in this new age of neurodynamics in the book we brought out just before Christmas. So that would simultaneously update a lot of your references, particularly the Dennett and the older ones, and also hook it into an inclusion of the latest neuroscience work on neurodynamics and holistic rhythms of response to the world in the brain.
Thanks. So to update this for the conference, I was thinking about digging out some. I probably won't talk about the second set of things. So I'll just focus on the tricky distinction between mental and bodily. But yeah, I'll have a look at your book because I think that might be a good way to do it.
Even a glance at the chapter summaries will steer you right on to the things you want to update your neuro reference.
Yeah, that's great.
Simon?
Thanks, John. I totally agree with this, and it is really strange that a whole problem can just emerge on the basis of what looks like a really obvious mistake. I'm wondering if we can do anything more to make sense of this. So basically, there's a presumption that at some point, a concern about bodily integrity becomes something different, and it's now mental integrity. And it's all premised on the idea that it's different in some way, yeah. I did see Tom give a talk on this here, and I felt the same way. It seems to me that all the issues they're raising reduce to ordinary concerns about interference with the person's agency. Is that an adequate summary of your position? Yeah. And so with that coffee example, well, the coffee itself is obviously changing us both mentally and physically. And the only thing that's wrong, to my mind, with the slipping the antidepressants in is that you haven't asked, which is actually quite a substantial problem. But you could do that exercise in a number of ways because we create situations where people desire things. I was thinking of a neighbour I had who wanted to put a Coke machine halfway up Baldwin Street, sort of exploiting this change that happens in people psychologically and physically as they climb the steep hill. But they have a choice, and that's what makes the difference. So, yeah, I just agree. I'm interested in exploring some of the other themes a bit more, but I think I think this needs to be said. Was Tom at the first version of this talk?
Yeah.
How did he like it?
He doesn't care.
That's what it's
Got the citations.
I suppose the other thing I'd say is that it does show that bodily integrity is it's a problematic concept in itself because it's pointing people in this direction, where it's something else. How would you rephrase bodily integrity?
Well, I think I think we all have the intuition that there's something really important about bodily integrity. Think about consent in the context of surgery, the right to say no, you're really not doing that. But what are you not? It's not just that you're not doing that to my body; it's you're not doing that to me. So I think already within bodily integrity, it's it's a kind of living aware body.
Yeah,
it's not a deceased body with no mind in it.
Yeah, exactly. So if somebody brushes up against me on the crowded street, like at the protest the other day, they brushed against my body. They might have, this space has been interfered with. But I'm not. There's nothing special about that. It's no different from somebody shouting in my ear, or exposing me to things I didn't want to think about. They're both potentially bad, depending on how it's done in the context of the normative considerations around all of that. That's what I think. So, yeah.
So we have Mike and then myself and then Neil. So all that.
Thanks, John. This is great talk. And just thinking of the cases, so you started off and you were saying there's the two cases that Tom and his co-author had, the antidepressant and the other. And I sort of thought, and your concern was they both have a bodily element to it, right?
Which
It's
you can
hard
see,
to separate. Yeah. Oh, and both have a mental element. Sorry, both have a mental element to them, a mental sort of effect.
I think that
The
one.
asthma and the
I think that what they wanted to say was both of them violate your right to bodily integrity.
and
But
only
it's
one does the other.
the
Yeah,
mental
does the
thing,
mental
yeah.
thing. Yeah. So I'm trying to think: is there a case that does sort of pull these things apart better? And I was thinking if you just have to, maybe there's some medication that doesn't cut it. Someone gives me something in my coffee and a mole on my back, which it doesn't affect me. I don't really feel it in any way day to day, but it disappears. So I no longer have this mole. My body, to that extent, has been interfered with. Mentally, no difference. I'm not even aware that there's a change. It's not even. So that's clearly that I've been violated. Feel it. They could carry on, disappear, changing my back quite radically without me really noticing. I could look in the mirror, but I don't really track this. And then another one that means that I start seeing reason to have blue things around me a lot.
Yeah.
And so I've got a new preference or something,
Yeah.
and it's generating reasons. And it wasn't something that I liked before. I could go, well, I guess I like blue now or something like that. But that seems like a mental thing. They both, that involves me taking a pill, but you could come up with some other way to do it. So, does that change anything at all for what you're saying, or are you saying there's a general right here that would kind of cover both of these things, and it's picking out both of them in the same way?
So if I was going for, trying to get an example going that was clearly something meant, if it was me, I'd be thinking about colours and thinking about qualia. Something that's, there's this famous old example of Mary and the colourblind room, where Mary knows all the colour facts except what red's like.
Yeah, right.
Suppose that someone slipped something into Mary's drink so that she all of a sudden started having red qualia. Does she know something new? Well, according to the author of that example, yes, she does.
Yeah.
Has it violated her right to mental integrity, or could we still tell a story about it in terms of bodily integrity? So there's still a room to wriggle there and say, oh, actually, it's not so much that she knows something, she can do something in the world. So the extended mind hypothesis could say something there. I was thinking about, is that you're a mole on the back and saying, well, what if it's precancerous cell flush, and you slip into someone's drink and they've got precancerous cells in their bladder, and they just they piss them out after.
Yeah.
So they never know.
And beneficial.
Yeah. Made them better off. So would that looks like that's really not a mental event, like it's a really physical impingement. Yeah.
So that's the kind of thing they're trying to get at. And would you need to sort of, you would say there's to the extent there's a problem with either of them, it's something to do with a person's kind of higher order approval of the new way that they are. Is that right? It's sort of
Well, that's the thing that so you're thinking about the second part, about what would make it right.
Yeah, or yeah, that's right. If they didn't approve of these things, they couldn't make them hard themselves in some way.
Yeah,
Then that would
I
be-
don't know. I mean, I don't know that would lead into implications for thinking about the sort of integrity of agency view, which is what I was
Yeah, right.
bringing up.
Yes, yeah. That's right.
And you might also say, well, look, here's an example of something which really is just bodily. There's no mental nature to precancerous cell flush.
Mm.
But then surely you could just say, oh, well, that's an example of your right to bodily integrity being violated that has no that you got no awareness of.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah,
not,
yeah.
but that's helpful. I think probably coming up with some sharper examples might be a way when writing this up to push to be more generous. To the thesis. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, John, for reminding us about this problem. Well, yeah, I think you could even be harsher at the beginning.
Yeah.
About what you're going to be doing. I like Alvin Noe's got some nice quotes as well about, us not really about the mind and the body in the world, the brain and the body in the world. I kept being really puzzled about what the project was that you're critiquing, which is not to say you weren't clear. Like, it seemed to me that all the examples were things that were already considered wrong, and already count as you could frame them as being wrong because they are an infringement on somebody's physical integrity or bodily integrity. I mean, they're framed other ways too, but they're already wrong. And I thought, or I would have hoped that this project of this new kind of wrong would be not just an exacerbating factor in a wrong, but like some new kind of wrong that we hadn't really been capturing because we'd been so obsessed with physical kind of stuff, and we'd been missing that there were these other harms. And I haven't read Nita Farahane's book, so I don't know what she's got a new-ish book about a kind of a whole set of wrongs that she sees related to neurotechnologies. And so I don't know, but I just wonder if you haven't looked at it, if you would look at it, maybe because maybe there is another set of wrongs, things that people are experiencing that we have an intuition don't sound right but can't get captured on any of these other ways of thinking. Because I was like, well, maybe the mental integrity should be something like it's more expansive than what Tom and others are suggesting. Maybe it's something like it's kind of a privacy right, or it's related to it. So like maybe my mental integrity is violated when companies, scour my Facebook page, scour all my purchasing history, put that together with whatever they can find out from the IDI about me, and then they create this picture of me. And, that's maybe where we get because that's not considered a wrong or an invasion of me in any way whatsoever officially, but actually I think many people have an intuition that that's starting to be a kind of invasion against your identity and yourself. And that's why we have things like the right to be forgotten being asserted in Europe. And so I kind of was like, is that fertile ground for some of these impulses versus just an exacerbating factor in a clearly an invasion of somebody's bodily integrity? I just is there any hope there for this kind of stuff?
We're just kind of drifting, I think, was thinking about like there is something around radical affronts to agency, and that's what I think you're talking about. And we've kind of had that experience as well, or we think you've had that experience when you feel like Facebook or some other social media somehow has your preferences.
Misrepresenting you or creating a version of you that isn't you and you have no control over. That feels like an affront to something that's currently not captured by no one hit me, no one even brushed past me, it's nothing to do with that.
Suppose someone out there's created digital twins for all of us who are exactly like us, and they're kind of putting inputs in to see what we're going to do next. Something like that, that's not bodily integrity, but that's like an affront to agency. And it's not really mentality, it's something else. It's something about what really matters to a human.
Right. That's where some energy needs to go, maybe.
I think so. And that's sort of what I was,
that's my fantasy about what these people would have been getting at, but clearly they weren't.
But that book's on my list to read this week. So Jenny Blythe Barbie's just published something that talks about some of the examples there.
I don't know that looks like, but it seems like, yeah. Okay.
For this audience, I need to get some better.
Because it would be good structurally to end a talk with positive
Yeah,
suggestion for like
Yeah.
where we should instead be
yeah,
taking this
yeah.
like, you know, most charitably, it's like they think there's something else going on, and so therefore maybe it could be this instead, you know.
How about, a thing that strikes me about all of the examples is that consent's doing a lot of work in all of them. And so consent partly comes from bodily integrity, but maybe consent is the thing that needs to be stretched out because it encompasses agency. Did you really know that they were going to create digital twin view?
There's like a sort of a similar shaped problem related to why is sexual assault worse than assault that's just as bad, except that it's not sexual.
Mm.
And it's because they have this intuition that there's an extra thing bad or but anyway. Neil?
Sorry, looming over the room like this. Thanks very much, John. It's always great to hear a bit of, sort of tough philosophy in the bioethics zone. So I really enjoyed that. I just have a question about the tough philosophy bit, the mind-body distinction. So I can imagine 3 ways in which people might want to get at that distinction. So one would be to kind of accept that, to say it's a kind of continuum, and it's just a lot of grey stuff. There are lots and lots of examples where it's really difficult to tell whether what's going on is something in the mind or something in the body. But we could really think up some examples which were clearly mind and some examples that were clearly body. But the grey area is big and difficult. Or you could say, actually, the thing here is there's never anything going on in the mind that doesn't have a kind of bodily element, and never anything going on in the body that doesn't have a mind element. So you've always got the 2 things present. And again, it might be difficult to say how much of one there is as opposed to the other. Or you might go kind of Wittgensteinian and just say the notions of the mind and body don't make any sense to start off with. They're generalizations from particulars that don't really add up, don't add anything to the particulars. So the 2 concepts which seem to be doing so much work aren't really doing any work at all when you look at it. I'm just wondering whether you identify with any of those 3 camps, or whether you've got a bit of a foot in all 3, if that's possible.
I think I've probably got a foot in all 3. And my view is that one of the reasons why I think the extended mind hypothesis or thesis is correct is because of how I view the nature of contentful mental events, where I think they, in order to kind of have to be fully contentful or to have the richness that they do, they involve the world or the body. So I'm sort of not saying that if you take all of those things out, there isn't something left over, but it's not clear that the thing that's left over is something that we could say much about. That's my actual view, but that's another argument. So that's both partly a Wittgensteinian view, but also I think a view about what's left over once you take out the embodied and situated in the world aspects of the mind.
Jing Bao had a question which I think will be the last question, so I don't have too many minutes left.
Well, be quick. Thank you. That's a fascinating actually. The topic has set of issue here. I've never really thought that much before. So a quick response, reflection about half marathon actually, that was exactly that pain was part of joy for gone through the physical torture. That's exactly the point. So I have a big pain there. Of course, I will not be mind in thunder sleep. by my wife to put a pinot under my lower neck and without my consent. But that will be more trustworthiness rather than the consent and my agency. Second, since you are going to give the talk in Shanghai, and people may come up with the scenario. There was a very popular science fiction movie called The Wandering Earth. In it, the novel, in it, gene editing was used to enhance the cognitive capability for space travel to save Earth.
Yeah.
So my question for you is here. It's your account of moral, the mental integrity and the moral agency is more wanted incorporating the web of human relationships than the other account about their mental integrity. You want more with incorporating relationships.
Yeah, I think so. So, so if a kind of, so is it Wandering Earth? I'm going to look that up.
Wandering.
It kind of nice to have an example that people know about. And so people, so does it make people less committed to relationships, able to deal with people passing away, so you can do space travel? Is that the thought?
To have a better memory capability
when
traveling.
Yeah.
It was not clear whether it's a somatic gene editing or it's genome editing.
Yeah, I'd have to think about it. It's an interesting thought. With the examples that I've looked at, people are kind of happier with the way in which they engage with other people. So that would suggest that, you know, if the way you are now conforms to how you want to be, and part of that is how you interact with other people and your significant relationships, then I think it is part of that, would be part of the picture. Yeah. So
Thank you very much, John. Next week, because there are so many people vying for next week's slot, I will take it. I think I'll put myself up and I'll talk about the current panic around so-called below replacement fertility rates, which is a talk that I also gave in Montenegro at a conference on existential threats. But we'll send around the notice about it too. So thanks for coming, and thank you very much, John. Oh, look at that. Girl, is real.
yeah, it's real.